The sky was bleeding. Great plumes of smoke coiled into the atmosphere, blotting out the stars where alien warships still hovered, their silhouettes vast and motionless, like gods surveying the ashes of their conquest. The ground was thick with the stench of burnt flesh and shattered metal. The battle for Earth was over. The Xeric had won. Captain Elias Vance lay half-buried beneath the wreckage of a collapsed structure, blood pooling in his mouth, his left leg pinned beneath a slab of concrete. His unit was gone, slaughtered in the final assault that had crushed the last human stronghold. The city, once a beacon of humanity's resilience, was now a charred husk. He struggled to move, pain lancing up his side, but he gritted his teeth and shoved against the debris. The effort sent stars bursting across his vision, but he managed to drag himself free, gasping against the acrid air. A Xeric drone hovered nearby, scanning the bodies for survivors. Its elongated carapace gleamed under the dim glow of distant fires, and the soft hum of its energy core sent a chill down Elias's spine. He remained motionless, pressing himself into the ruins, barely breathing. The drone lingered, violet sensors pulsing as it swept its gaze over the carnage. Seconds stretched into an eternity before it finally whirred away, satisfied that nothing remained alive. Elias exhaled shakily and forced himself to his feet. His rifle was gone, lost in the chaos, but his sidearm was still strapped to his thigh. A battered M1911, ancient by modern standards but solid and dependable. His fingers curled around the worn grip as he limped forward, slipping through the wreckage with the quiet desperation of a man who refused to die just yet. Beneath the ruins of a collapsed skyscraper, he found an old maintenance tunnel, its entrance partially buried but still accessible. He dropped inside, wincing as his leg throbbed in protest, and pressed forward into the dark. Somewhere down here, the last remnants of Earth's resistance were still breathing. If he was the only one left topside, he had to reach them. The tunnel stretched on, damp and stifling, the air thick with mildew and decay. When he emerged into a makeshift hideout beneath the ruins, the scent of blood and sweat was suffocating. Dim lamps flickered, casting long shadows over gaunt faces. A voice cut through the murmurs. "Thought you were dead." Elias turned toward the sound. Rachel Ortiz, former combat medic and full-time cynic, leaned against the supply crate, arms crossed over her chest. Her uniform was stained, her dark hair pulled back into a loose, messy bun. She looked exhausted, but unsurprised. "So did I," Elias muttered. A man stepped forward, grizzled, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from years of war. Reynolds. He had once been a commander, before ranks had lost their meaning. Now he was simply the leader of the last humans left standing. "You saw what happened up there?" Reynolds asked. Elias nodded grimly. "It's done. The Xeric wiped out everything. Whatever's left of us is right here." Silence hung over the room, heavy and suffocating. They had always known this day might come. That didn't make it any easier. Then, a voice from the corner, younger, edged with something close to defiance. "Not yet." Dylan Park, the closest thing they had to a tech expert, straightened from where he'd been hunched over a broken radio. His glasses were smudged, his fingers streaked with grease. "The Xeric Overlord is coming to Earth." Elias frowned. "Why?" Reynolds exhaled sharply. "Victory lap. They don't just want to conquer us," Dylan continued. "They want to make sure we know we've lost. He's landing at their command post in 2 days. Probably wants to walk through the wreckage and admire his handiwork." Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "Wonderful. Do we at least get front row seats?" Dylan ignored her. "Their personal shields make them immune to our energy weapons. That's why we couldn't stop them in the first place." Elias knew that too well. Plasma rifles, rail cannons, even orbital strikes. None of it had touched the Xeric commanders. Their technology made them invincible, at least against modern weapons. But kinetic force, Dylan continued, still works. Their shields aren't designed to block something as primitive as a bullet. Elias's fingers brushed over the grip of his pistol, a slow realization dawning. Reynolds caught on. "You're saying if we can get a clean shot, we kill him," Dylan finished. "A single bullet. One shot. and the Xeric lose their leader. The idea was madness. The Overlord would be surrounded by an entire army. Even if they could get into position, even if the shot was perfect, there was no getting out. Rachel snorted. So, humanity's grand plan is to shoot an alien god with a glorified museum piece? Dylan grinned. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds crazy. Elias wasn't smiling. His mind was already working. Where's the landing site? Dylan pulled out a crude map, the paper torn and stained. What used to be Washington, D.C. Their command post is set up in the ruins. The best vantage point is the old Capitol building. The dome's still standing, barely, but it'll give us a clear line of sight. Reynolds studied the map. Once you take the shot, we won't be able to get you out. Every Xeric in the sector will be hunting you. Elias stared at the map, then at the pistol in his hand. He had carried it for years, long past its usefulness, as a symbol of something he hadn't been able to name. Now, for the first time, he understood. I'll do it. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Rachel ran a hand down her face. You ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, we're the villains for not knowing when to quit? Dylan shrugged. Quitting's boring. Reynolds didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. If this works, we buy humanity another chance. Elias holstered the pistol. He had been a soldier all his life, fighting battles he had known he couldn't win. Maybe this was just another one of those. Or maybe, just maybe, one bullet could change everything. The night before the mission, Elias lay awake beneath the crumbling remains of what had once been a library. The weight of what he was about to do pressed against his chest like a vice. Outside, the sky pulsed with the distant glow of Xeric patrol ships, sweeping over the ruins in slow, deliberate arcs. The city was dead, but the enemy still combed through its remains, determined to stamp out any lingering ember of defiance. Rachel sat beside him, cleaning the knife she always carried, the steel catching the dim firelight. She didn't look at him when she spoke. You sure about this? No, Elias admitted. She huffed a quiet laugh. That's the most honest thing you've said in days. Silence stretched between them, comfortable in its inevitability. They both knew the odds. Even if the shot landed, there was no clear escape. No reinforcements. No cavalry charging in at the last second. Just a bullet and whatever came after. Got a plan for after? Rachel asked. Elias exhaled, staring at the ceiling. Never thought that far ahead. She nodded, as if she'd expected that. Try not to die ugly. That's all I ask. Dylan snored softly from the other side of the room, curled against a rusted console, while Reynolds paced near the entrance, muttering to himself. No one truly rested the night before something like this. The air was thick with the unspoken. At dawn, they moved. Navigating through the ruins was slow, the city an open graveyard of shattered buildings and scorched streets. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. The Xeric were everywhere, tall, angular figures draped in shifting black armor, their weapons humming with restrained violence. Their drones swept overhead, scanning for life. Elias led the way, keeping low as they weaved through the wreckage. Dylan carried the rifle, wrapped in cloth, his fingers twitching with nerves. Rachel trailed behind, her pistol loose in her grip, eyes constantly scanning. Reynolds brought up the rear, silent and grim. They reached the outskirts of the Xeric command post by midday. What had once been the heart of Washington, D.C., was now a monolithic war camp, draped in alien banners. The Capitol building stood at its center, barely recognizable beneath the spires of Xeric technology that had fused with its bones. Elias studied it from a distance. It was still standing, just as Dylan had said. The dome remained intact, and if they could reach it, he would have the vantage point he needed. Getting there was another matter entirely. Reynolds crouched beside him, studying the sentries. We won't get past them without a distraction. Rachel smirked. I could strip and start singing. Might buy you a few seconds. Dylan snorted. You'd scare them more than distract them. Elias didn't smile. We split up. Dylan and I moved to the Capitol. You two cause enough chaos to keep eyes off us. Reynolds didn't like it, but he nodded. We'll give you as much time as we can. Rachel slapped Dylan's shoulder. If you get killed, I'm stealing your boots. Noted, Dylan muttered. Then they were moving. Elias and Dylan slipped through the ruins, keeping to the shadows as Rachel and Reynolds disappeared in the opposite direction. Moments later, the air split with the crack of gunfire, followed by the deep, resonant boom of an explosion. Shouts erupted as Zarek forces scrambled to respond, their patrols shifting, drawn toward the sudden threat. Elias didn't wait. He and Dylan sprinted across the open ground, reaching the base of the Capitol in seconds. The main entrance was heavily guarded, but a collapsed section of the structure provided an opening. They climbed through, dust and debris coating their clothes as they emerged into the hollow remains of what had once been a grand hall. Alien machinery pulsed along the walls, sickly violet light casting long, eerie shadows. The climb to the dome was treacherous. Staircases had collapsed, leaving only unstable scaffolding and exposed beams. They moved carefully, testing each step. Somewhere outside, gunfire rattled through the city. At the top, Elias found his perch. The dome structure had been reinforced with alien metal, but a section near the edge had crumbled, giving him a clear line of sight to the landing zone. He unwrapped the rifle, settling into position. Dylan crouched beside him, breathless. "One shot," he murmured. "That's all we get." Elias peered through the scope. The Zarek had formed a perimeter around a sleek black craft that pulsed with unearthly energy. At its center, a towering figure descended the ramp, twice the height of a man, its body encased in armor that shimmered like liquid darkness. The Overlord. Elias steadied his breathing. The Overlord stepped forward, raising a clawed hand. A hush fell over the gathered Zarek, reverence thick in the air. Elias exhaled slowly. The wind was steady. Distance, 800 meters. Target, exposed between the plating of his collar and the base of his skull. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the ruined city. The bullet tore through the air, faster than thought, faster than sound, a relic of an ancient war that had no place in this one. And then it struck. The Overlord's body jerked as the bullet punched through his throat. He staggered, clawing at the wound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. The Zarek howled in alarm, their disciplined ranks fracturing as their leader collapsed. Some rushed to him, others searched wildly for the shooter. Dylan let out a stunned breath. "Holy!" Elias grabbed him. "Move!" They scrambled back down as alarms blared through the city. The Zarek were already swarming, drones spiraling overhead, spotlights cutting through the ruins. Their only exit was fire and ruin. Elias kept moving. There was no time to think, no time to regret. He had made the shot. The Overlord was dead, but they still had to survive what came next. The city howled with fury. The moment the Overlord's body collapsed, the Zarek forces erupted into a storm of motion, their formations shattering as orders were barked in their guttural, alien tone. The sleek black war machines that had once stood motionless in eerie confidence now surged to life, their weapons thrumming with restrained annihilation. The death of their leader had ignited something primal within them, a rage so vast it seemed to vibrate through the very air. Elias didn't wait to see the aftermath. He hauled Dylan up by the collar, forcing him into motion as they scrambled down the fractured scaffolding. The structure beneath them groaned in protest, weakened by years of neglect and recent destruction. Dust and debris rained down, the Capitol's bones threatening to collapse under the weight of their escape. They reached the lower levels just as the first explosion rocked the building. A plasma strike, bright and searing, tore through the dome where they had been only seconds before, obliterating the sniper's perch in a shower of molten metal and stone. The heat was suffocating, pressing against their backs like an open furnace. Dylan coughed, staggering forward. "They're really mad." Elias grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Good. Let's make it worse." They sprinted through the ruins, weaving between broken columns and shattered remnants of a world that no longer belonged to them. Outside, the Zarek forces were tightening the noose. Troops poured in from every direction, their elongated forms moving with deadly precision. Drones sliced through the air, scanning, hunting. Elias, pressed himself against a crumbling pillar, scanning for an opening. Their only advantage was the chaos. Without their leader, the Xeric operated on fractured instincts, their command structure momentarily severed. But that wouldn't last. A familiar voice crackled through the radio, strapped to his belt. "Tell me you're still breathing." Elias clicked the receiver. "Barely." Rachel's voice was sharp, urgent. "You've got company headed your way." Reynolds and I stirred up enough hell to make them rethink their life choices, but they're still swarming the whole damn sector. "Extraction point?" Elias asked. A brief pause. "Forget it. The route's compromised. We can't reach you." Dylan swore under his breath. Elias exhaled slowly, forcing his mind to stay clear. They had known from the beginning that survival was unlikely. That didn't mean he was about to lie down and let it happen. Another explosion sent tremors through the ground. The Xeric were leveling the ruins, systematically reducing the capital to dust. The air shimmered with heat and violence, the scent of scorched stone thick in every breath. Elias glanced at Dylan. "We move fast, we move quiet." Dylan nodded, his face pale, but set with determination. They slipped into the wreckage, keeping low, ducking beneath fallen beams, and weaving through the skeletal remains of the once great structure. Elias's mind worked at breakneck speed, mapping possible routes, calculating distances, scanning for anything they could use to their advantage. The Xeric were closing in. Their guttural voices grew louder, closer. Boots crunched against debris. Elias spotted an opening, a collapsed tunnel that led beneath the capital, a passage carved through destruction. It was narrow, treacherous, but would buy them distance. He motioned to Dylan, and they dove inside, just as a searchlight swept past the spot where they had stood seconds before. They moved quickly, each step careful, the air thick with dust and the echoes of a dying city. Somewhere above them, the Xeric continued their hunt, unaware that their prey had slipped beneath their feet. The tunnel stretched deeper, the remnants of old government structures twisting into forgotten passages. It was dark, the walls damp with condensation, but it was silent. No drones, no soldiers. Dylan panted beside him. "Do we even know where this goes?" "No idea," Elias admitted. A faint chuckle. "Great. Love a good mystery." They pressed forward. Time blurred. The deeper they went, the more the sounds of destruction faded. The war above still raged, but down here, it was like another world entirely, one filled with nothing but shadows and the distant drip of water. Then a light ahead, dim, flickering, but unmistakably artificial. Elias slowed, signaling Dylan to stay quiet. They crept toward the glow, weapons ready, hearts hammering. As they stepped into the open space, the first thing Elias registered was the scent, sterile, metallic, tinged with ozone. The second thing was the massive structure in the center of the chamber. A Xeric ship, not a war machine, not one of the towering behemoths that had razed Earth cities. This was something different, sleek, compact, built for transport. It pulsed with latent energy, the hum of its systems barely audible. Elias turned to Dylan. "Can you fly it?" Dylan blinked. "What?" "The ship. Can you fly it?" "Aye." Dylan ran a hand through his sweat-matted hair. "It's alien. I don't even know where the cockpit is." Elias took a step forward, scanning the structure. The Xeric rarely used traditional controls. Their ships were designed to respond to organic input, biometric locks, neural interfaces, which meant his gaze landed on a console near the entrance, a series of embedded symbols glowing faintly. He pressed a tentative hand against the surface. Nothing. Then, a flicker of light. The ship stirred, energy surging through its veins like a beast waking from slumber. Dylan let out a breathless laugh. "You just guessed." Elias shrugged. "Lucky guess." The ship's systems came to life, the hum growing into a steady thrum. Lights flickered across the interior, panels shifting, rearranging. Somewhere outside, the distant sounds of Xeric voices grew louder. They were running out of time. Dylan scrambled into the cockpit, fingers flying over the alien controls. Elias took position by the entrance, pistol raised, listening. Footsteps. Close. Then, a guttural roar. The Zarek had found them. The first one rounded the corner, weapon raised. Elias fired without hesitation, the bullet punching through its throat, sending it crashing backward. More followed, their forms moving like shadows in the dim light. Dylan cursed from the cockpit. I have no idea what I'm doing. Figure it out faster. Another shot. Another Zarek down. But there were too many. Elias could already see it. They would be overwhelmed in seconds. He stepped back, placing himself between Dylan and the oncoming storm. The ship rumbled beneath them. The systems pulsed, the interior shifting as if reshaping itself. Dylan shouted something, but Elias barely heard him over the chaos. Then, suddenly, the ship lurched. A blast of energy erupted from its core, sending shockwaves through the tunnel. The Zarek were thrown back, weapons clattering from their hands. The air vibrated with power. Elias staggered, gripping the doorway. Dylan, I got it, Dylan yelled. The ship rose, metal groaning, the tunnel walls blurring as the engines roared to life. The Zarek scrambled, their shrieks of fury swallowed by the rising hum. Then, with a final shudder, the ship blasted free, bursting into the ruined sky like a spear of light. Elias collapsed into his seat, breathing hard. Below them, the city burned. The Zarek raged. And above them, for the first time in what felt like eternity, the stars waited.